3 years ago, my wife, Anna, and I moved to a small village. We had both grown tired of city life, the noise, the crowds, and the stress. We wanted something quieter, something simpler. So, when we found this village with its peaceful fields, fresh air, and a calm river running nearby, it felt like the perfect place to start fresh. Our neighbor, Emily, was one of the first people we met. She lived alone in the house next door. Her husband had passed away a few years back, but she seemed to be managing on her own. Emily was friendly and kind, and over time we became close. We often invited her over for tea, and she even helped us settle into the village. Anna enjoyed her company, and so did I. But one evening, everything changed. I was out walking our dog by the edge of the forest when I noticed someone standing among the trees. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. It made me uneasy, but I figured it might be someone from the village. I didn't say anything to Anna that night, thinking I didn't want to worry her over nothing. Then I saw him again. A few days later, he was standing near the river this time, staring at our house. I couldn't make out his face, but I felt like he was watching us, or maybe just watching me. It gave me a bad feeling, but again, I brushed it off. Probably just a curious villager, I told myself. But the next time he was closer. I was fixing something in the garden when I noticed him again, standing by the barn, just standing there, watching. When I looked up, he turned and disappeared into the forest. That's when I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't normal to see someone that often and for them to always vanish like that. I decided to tell Anna about it. She listened carefully but didn't seem too concerned at first. I guess I didn't sound worried enough. I wasn't even sure what to make of it myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After that, I saw him almost every day. Sometimes in the early mornings, other times just before sunset. Always watching, never coming closer, and never staying for long. I decided to ask the villagers if they had seen him, but no one seemed to know who I was talking about. Some even laughed and said I must have been imagining things. Anna started to notice my uneasiness. She asked me if everything was okay, and I told her about the man. Her face turned pale, and she insisted we keep the doors locked from then on. I tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then one evening, while I was at work, Anna saw him herself. She told me he was standing by the river, just staring at the house. She was scared. I could see it in her eyes when I got home. That's when I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, Emily came by the house. She looked different, tired and worried. Anna asked her if she had ever seen the man, but Emily didn't want to talk about it. That struck me as odd. Emily was usually so open with us, but she seemed scared, almost as if she knew something we didn't. Later that night, when Emily was leaving, she pulled me aside. "You need to be careful, Sam," she whispered, her eyes darting around as if she was afraid someone might hear. "That man isn't who you think he is." Before I could ask her what she meant, she hurried away. Now, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was this man? And why was Emily so afraid of him? After Emily's warning, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep inside me. Who was this man? And what did Emily know that she wasn't telling us? For days, I didn't see him again. It was almost as if he had vanished. Anna started to relax, and life in the village seemed to go back to normal. But for me, the feeling never left. I kept expecting to see him, kept waiting for him to appear. I started avoiding the forest, just in case. One evening, I was working late in the barn, and that's when I heard something. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate. I froze, my heart racing. I waited, barely breathing, and then I heard it again. Closer this time. I grabbed a wrench from the workbench, my hand trembling. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait, so I stepped outside. Nothing. The moonlight cast long shadows over the trees, but there was no sign of anyone. My pulse was still racing, though. I knew I had heard something. As I turned to go back inside, I caught sight of a figure near the edge of the forest. It was him, just standing there, watching me. My chest tightened. I took a step forward, trying to call out to him, but my voice caught in my throat. He didn't move. I wanted to confront him, to ask him what he wanted, but fear kept me rooted in place. After what felt like forever, the man slowly turned and disappeared into the darkness of the trees. I wanted to chase after him, but something inside me told me not to. When I got back inside, Anna noticed my pale face right away. I told her what happened, and her worry returned. "We should talk to Emily again," she said. "She knows something." The next day we went to Emily's house, but she wasn't home. Her curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of life inside. We knocked, but no one answered. That was strange. Emily was always home. We waited for a while, but after an hour, we gave up and went back to our place. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't right. Emily's warning, her strange behavior, and now she was gone. A few days later, while walking through the village, I overheard two men talking at the market. They mentioned Emily's name and how no one had seen her for days. One of the men said she had gone to stay with family, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Emily hadn't mentioned any family before. I started to wonder if something had happened to her. Then, the next day, Anna found a note slipped under our door. It was from Emily. The note read, "Don't trust him. He's not who he says he is. Be careful." That was it. No explanation, no signature. But I knew it was from her. Anna and I were both shaken. Who was this man, and why was Emily so scared of him? I decided to go into the forest and try to find him myself. I couldn't just keep waiting for him to show up. I needed answers. So, that evening, just before sunset, I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the woods. As I entered the forest, The trees seemed to close in around me. The air felt heavier, and every sound was amplified. The crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves. I kept moving deeper into the trees, my heart pounding. After about 20 minutes of walking, I saw something ahead. A small cabin, hidden deep in the woods. I hadn't known it was there before. The door was slightly ajar, and there was a faint light coming from inside. I hesitated for a moment, but then I heard a noise. Someone was inside. I stepped closer, my hand gripping the flashlight tightly. Just as I was about to push the door open, I heard a voice from behind me. Looking for something? I spun around, and there he was, standing just a few feet away. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but I could see his eyes. They were dark and cold. My breath caught in my throat. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, a slow, unsettling smile, and said, "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could say anything, the door to the cabin creaked open behind me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned back to look inside the cabin, but it was too dark to see. When I turned back to face the man, he was gone. Weeks passed after that unsettling night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The note with the cryptic words, the unease that hung in the air whenever I walked through the village. It all pointed to something hidden, something just out of reach. I stopped telling Anna about my thoughts. I didn't want to worry her. But the truth was, I couldn't rest until I knew who this stranger was and why he had taken such an interest in our lives. One evening, as the autumn chill set in, I received a call from John, the man who had sold us the house. He hadn't been in touch since the sale, and the timing of his call felt strange. He asked if I could meet him in the village's small pub. His voice sounded tense, like he had something important to tell me. I agreed, feeling a knot form in my stomach. When I arrived, John was sitting in the corner, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly as he held his drink. Without any small talk, he got straight to the point. "Have you noticed anything odd about the house?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for a reaction. I didn't know how to respond. I had noticed plenty of things, but I wasn't sure what he was referring to. "I've seen a man wandering near our house," I said cautiously. "I don't know who he is, but he's been leaving notes, and there's something off about the whole village." John took a deep breath and leaned in closer. "There's something I never told you about the house. Something I should have mentioned, but I thought it didn't matter anymore." I felt my heart race as I braced for whatever he was about to say. "Years ago," John began, "a man lived in that house. Alone. His name was Daniel. He was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly, but one day he vanished. No one saw him leave, and no one ever found him. The house was empty for years before you moved in, and there were rumors about what happened to him." I stared at John, trying to process what he was saying. "Rumors? Some say he was involved in something dark?" Others think he simply lost his mind and disappeared into the forest. But the strangest part is, after he vanished, people started seeing him. Not the man himself, but his shadow, wandering the village, standing by the river, watching. My blood ran cold. The man I had seen, could it have been Daniel? Was he the one leaving the notes? Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked, anger rising in my chest. John looked genuinely remorseful. I thought it was just old folklore, stories the villagers told to scare newcomers. But when you mentioned the man, I knew I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I left the pub that night with more questions than answers. Who was Daniel? And what did he want with us? The pieces weren't fitting together, and I felt like I was being pulled deeper into something I didn't understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside, footsteps in the distance, the creak of our front door. Though it remained locked, the house felt colder than usual, as if some unseen presence lingered in the corners. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Then, just before dawn, I heard the softest knock at the front door. I froze. Anna stirred beside me, but she didn't wake. Slowly, I crept out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The knocking came again. Soft, almost hesitant. I tiptoed to the door, peeking through the small window. There, in the dim light of dawn, stood the stranger. He wasn't moving, just standing there, his back straight, his eyes fixed on the door. His face, now more visible in the morning light, looked oddly familiar. I don't know why, but a part of me felt drawn to him, like I needed to confront whatever this was, to get the answers I had been seeking for months. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door and opened it, just a crack. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The man stared at me for a long moment, then finally spoke. His voice was low and calm, almost soothing. "I'm here for what's mine." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" His eyes flicked past me, into the house. "This place. It's not yours. It never was." I stood there, frozen, as the weight of his words settled over me. And then, it hit me like a wave. His face, his voice. It wasn't just familiar. I had seen him before in the old photos we found when we first moved in. The man who vanished, the man John had warned me about. This was Daniel, or whatever was left of him. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut, locking it as fast as I could. I backed away, my heart racing. I didn't know if I was dealing with a man or something else entirely, but I knew one thing for sure. We were in danger. The next morning, I told Anna everything. We decided to leave the house, to get away from the village. But as we packed our things, I found another note, this time inside the house, on our kitchen table. It read, "You can leave, but I'll always be here, watching." That was the final straw. We left that day, never looking back. But even now, sometimes in the quiet of the night, I wonder if Daniel still roams those woods, watching, waiting for someone else to claim what he believes is his. And every so often, when I walk alone, I feel the weight of eyes on me,